Once you have VA benefits, you can still lose them. Hey, I am Chuck the Bureaucrat, and recently some of you have reached out asking me how or why the VA might take away benefits after they've been approved, especially how VA disability payments might be reduced or even terminated. So today, let's look at 4 situations where this can happen. But before I do that, let me make this point. To the VA, you are just a file full of documents. They don't know you personally, and so it's the documents in that file that determine what you get and whether or not you lose benefits. In a previous video, we talked about the steps to take to avoid disqualifying yourself from getting a benefit in the first place. If you don't document your symptoms, your diagnoses, your treatment histories over the course of your career, it's not particularly likely that the VA is going to approve you for a service-connected disability for an injury or illness. Essentially, you have to make sure that you create the documents that are going to go into that file that the VA is going to use to evaluate you. And that same idea that you're just a file full of documents is going to play into how the VA takes benefits away. Just to preview the situations where you can lose a benefit, you got good old-fashioned fraud, treasonous or subversive activities, clear and unmistakable errors, and review evaluations. Now, fraud is just any act that a person takes to make a false statement in any claim for benefits. The actual definition is a heck of a lot longer, with all kinds of legalese to cover all the different types of people who might participate in making a false statement and the myriad of ways that that false statement can be communicated. And when it comes to fraud, there is no statute of limitations. You can get nailed for fraud years after it's been committed. And judging from the press releases that come out of the VA's Office of Inspector General, they do a pretty brisk trade in catching and litigating various fraudulent activities. Although, I will say that most of these seem to be businesses engaged in some kind of scam. When it comes to individual veterans being found guilty of fraud, the examples I've found seem to have some common elements. Number 1, the vet either forged or falsified some documents that the VA used to determine their benefit eligibility in the first place. Number 2, the VA got tipped off to the fraud by some friend or family member. That is, somebody who knew that the veteran had committed fraud and then told the VA. The perpetrator of fraud didn't necessarily run afoul of the VA initially. In some cases, the fraud was noticed by another federal agency, say the Social Security Administration, when the veteran tried to apply for Social Security disability insurance. In short, they got greedy and overconfident, and then they got caught. So how do you avoid losing your benefits this way? Try not to commit fraud. Don't falsify documents. And even if you are perfectly legit, you might want to refrain from sitting on the fence post and bragging about your disability payments to every single person who walks by. See, you guys know that the VA's definition of a disability is different than the definition of a disability used by other federal agencies. But that doesn't mean that your coworkers or your college buddies understand that distinction. Tell enough people about your VA rating, eventually somebody is going to think that you're committing fraud. And if they're out to get you, they might be willing to report you. All right, the second way you can lose your VA benefits is through treasonous or subversive activities. Treasonous activities include mutiny, treason, sabotage, providing aid and assistance to the enemies of the U.S. and its allies. I mean, some pretty big no-nos that you're unlikely to accidentally get caught up in. Subversive activities, well, that's a bit more broad. They include any offense that has punishment prescribed by statute, and this includes UCMJ offenses. This covers offenses related to nuclear, biological, or chemical weapons, acts of terrorism, seditious conspiracy, and a number of offenses that involve gathering, transmitting, or losing defense information. Personally, it's the UCMJ thing that makes me most nervous, because there are some articles of UCMJ that retirees tend to violate fairly regularly without getting prosecuted. It makes me nervous because I can kind of imagine an overly zealous presidential administration that starts cracking down on that kind of behavior. I mean, I'm thinking about like Article 84, breach of medical quarantine. But treasonous and subversive activities are largely within your control, and I hope not something that you're seriously contemplating. You do not have that degree of control over this next way to lose your benefits. The VA has a concept that they call a clear and unmistakable error. And this ties back to the idea that you are just a file full of documents in the eyes of the VA. A clear and unmistakable error occurs when the facts that were true at the time that your file was reviewed were not before the evaluator when the decision was made. And a clear and unmistakable error can include the case where that adjudicator just overlooked something that was in your file. You can even have the case where relevant rules or laws that were in effect at the time the decision made weren't appropriately applied. There are a couple of minor requirements for something to qualify as a clear and unmistakable error. These include the fact that the error was the type that, had it not been made, the outcome would have been different. So just misspelling the middle name of a claimant is not enough to trigger a clear and unmistakable error. Now, oddly enough, a clear and unmistakable error can actually work in the favor of a veteran. In fact, some vets discover these errors as they go through the process of appealing their claim. But these types of errors can be a really unpleasant surprise. In fact, here's something that happened to one of my most loyal members. He was a gray area retiree. That's a reserve component service member who is eligible to receive a retirement, but has not reached the age when they can begin drawing that retirement. He submitted a claim to the VA, which apparently gray area retirees can do. He got evaluated, approved, and he started receiving checks. And then he got mobilized. Suddenly, his file looks a lot different to the VA. And just as suddenly, the VA believes that there has been a clear and unmistakable error. His case has not played out all the way, so we don't really know what's going to happen, but hopefully you can see how important that file is in terms of how the VA views you. Now, the fourth way that the VA can take away your benefits is through what's called a review examination. This occurs when the VA determines that there's a need to verify either the continued existence of a condition or the continued severity of a condition. A review examination can occur if it's likely that a disability has improved, if there's evidence indicating a material change in a disability, or if a review examination is required by the regulation or diagnostic code associated with the disability. To say the least, this situation causes veterans some sleepless nights. And Google searches seem to pull up lots and lots of websites for law firms that provide just enough information to encourage service members, retirees, to contact the law firm. I'm not going to cover everything about these review examinations today, but if you're interested in more, leave me a comment and I'll get on it. Instead, I'm going to focus on allaying your fears, or at least putting your concerns in the right context. First, it's VA's policy to request these review examinations only when necessary. And the VA manuals, which you can trust or distrust as much as you like, direct the VA staff to limit the cases where these future examinations are requested. Second, the factors that the VA uses to determine whether or not to initiate a review examination include the following: whether a veteran's current condition is acute, that is, severe but of a short duration, whether the veteran is recuperating following hospitalization, or that recovery or improvement is anticipated. It appears from the manual that these review examinations are actually scheduled years in advance of the actual examination being performed, but it wouldn't surprise me if some veterans feel as though they've been surprised by these examinations. And the veteran and the VA might be right here, because I have this sneaking suspicion that the VA might not effectively communicate that they're planning one of these exams. Anyways, there are a number of situations where the VA does not schedule a review examination. Some of these circumstances include when the veteran is older than 55, except in some very unusual circumstances, when the current rating is the minimum for a diagnostic code, when the current rating is 10%, and this is a big one, when the combined rating would not change even if there was a change to one of the re-examined disabilities. My point is that while review examinations are a threat to your benefits, they're not exactly as scary as they seem. When we were talking about how to compute combined ratings, I mentioned that I have 10 ratings ranging from 40% down to a whole bunch of 10%, and my combined rating is 90%. But guess what? If my 40% rating was reviewed and reduced to 0%, my combined rating would still be 90%. So, I'm not terribly worried, but if you have concerns, let me know and we can dig into them further. So, at the end of the day, how do you keep your VA benefits from being canceled? Don't commit fraud, avoid treasonous or subversive activities, make sure that there are no gaps in your file, and be aware of upcoming review examinations. And now, if you missed this video on how to document your service-connected illnesses or injuries, well, that might be a good one to review. And if you want to understand the idea behind combined ratings, watch this video.